Sarah Martinez stood in line at the grocery store, her hands trembling slightly as she counted the crumpled bills in her wallet. The young mother of two had been stretching every dollar since her husband deployed 6 months ago. Behind her, she could hear the low chuckles and whispered comments from a group of young soldiers who had been following her through the store. "Look at her trying to use those food stamps," one of them said, not bothering to lower his voice. "Probably another military wife living off the system while her husband's away." Sarah's cheeks burned with embarrassment as she fumbled with her WIC vouchers. Her 3-year-old daughter Emma clung to her leg, sensing the tension while baby Michael fussed in the shopping cart. She had hoped to get in and out quickly, but the store was busier than usual, and now she found herself the target of cruel comments from people who should have understood her situation. "I bet her husband's just some low-ranking grunt," another soldier continued, his voice carrying across the checkout area. "These wives always act like they deserve special treatment." The cashier, an older woman named Betty, gave Sarah a sympathetic look as she processed the vouchers. Sarah had been coming to this store for years, and Betty knew her story. She knew about David Martinez, Sarah's husband, and what he had sacrificed for his country. But Sarah had never been one to boast about her husband's achievements or rank. She carried herself with quiet dignity, never seeking attention or special treatment. "Don't let them bother you, honey," Betty whispered as she bagged Sarah's groceries. "Some people just don't know any better." But the soldiers weren't finished. As Sarah struggled to load her bags into the cart while managing both children, one of them stepped closer. He was young, probably 19 or 20, with the cocky attitude of someone who had never seen real combat. "Hey, lady," he called out, causing other shoppers to turn and stare. "Maybe if your husband actually did something important, you wouldn't need government handouts." Sarah stopped in her tracks. Her hands gripped the cart handle so tightly her knuckles turned white. She could feel the eyes of everyone in the store on her, waiting to see how she would respond. Part of her wanted to tell them exactly who her husband was and what he had done for his country. But she had learned long ago that true strength came from restraint, not confrontation. "My husband serves our country with honor," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to fall. "That's all you need to know." The soldiers laughed among themselves, clearly enjoying her discomfort. The ringleader, a corporal named Jake Thompson, stepped even closer. He had been in the army for 2 years and thought he knew everything about military life and hierarchy. "Honor?" he scoffed. "Lady, I've been deployed twice. I know the difference between real soldiers and weekend warriors. Your husband's probably sitting behind a desk somewhere while real men do the fighting." Emma began to cry, frightened by the loud voices and her mother's obvious distress. Sarah knelt down to comfort her daughter, whispering soothing words while trying to maintain her composure. The other shoppers watched uncomfortably, some looking sympathetic while others seemed annoyed by the disruption. Betty had seen enough. She reached for the phone behind the counter, ready to call store security, but Sarah caught her eye and shook her head. She didn't want to make the situation worse or create more of a scene. She just wanted to take her children and go home. "Please," Sarah said softly, standing up and facing the soldiers. "I'm just trying to shop for my family. Can't we all just go about our business peacefully?" But Jake Thompson wasn't ready to let it go. He was enjoying the attention and the feeling of power he had over this seemingly helpless woman. In his mind, he was teaching her a lesson about respect and military hierarchy. "You know what your problem is?" he continued, his voice getting louder. "You military wives think you're entitled to everything just because you married someone in uniform. But most of you married losers who couldn't make it in the real world." The words hit Sarah like physical blows. She thought about David, about the nights he stayed awake comforting wounded soldiers, about the times he had risked his own life to save others, about the decorations he had earned but never talked about. She thought about the nightmares he still had from his last deployment and the way he held her when he thought she was sleeping. "My husband is a good man," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He loves his family and serves his country. That should be enough." The other soldiers joined in the laughter, emboldened by their leader's cruelty. They began making jokes about desk jockeys and paper pushers, each comment designed to humiliate Sarah further. Other customers began to move away, uncomfortable with the confrontation but unwilling to intervene. Sarah felt completely alone in that moment, surrounded by hostile voices and judgmental stares. She had always been proud of being a military wife, proud of the sacrifices she and David made for their country, but right now in this grocery store she felt small and helpless. The automatic doors at the front of the store whooshed open, letting in a blast of cool evening air. A figure in military uniform stepped through the entrance, but Sarah was too focused on getting her children out of the situation to notice. She just wanted to escape the humiliation and get home to the safety of her small apartment. "Come on, Emma," she said gently, lifting her daughter into her arms while pushing the cart with baby Michael. "Let's go home." But Jake Thompson wasn't finished with his performance. He had an audience now, and he was determined to make his point. He didn't know that his words were about to come back to haunt him in a way he never could have imagined. He didn't know that sometimes karma arrives in the most unexpected forms. The stage was set for a confrontation that would change everything and teach a valuable lesson about respect, assumptions, and the true meaning of honor. As Sarah tried to maneuver past the group of soldiers with her cart and crying children, Jake Thompson decided to deliver what he thought would be his final blow. He stepped directly into her path, blocking her way to the exit. "Hold on there, sweetheart," he said with a smirk that made Sarah's stomach turn. "I'm not done talking to you yet. You see, people like me risk our lives every day while people like your husband sit safe and comfortable. The least you could do is show some gratitude." Sarah's patience was wearing thin, but she kept her voice calm for her children's sake. "Please move out of my way. My children are tired and we need to go home. Your children should learn early that respect is earned, not given," Jake continued, clearly enjoying the power he felt he had over her. Maybe if Mommy here understood that, she'd know her place better. The other soldiers were eating up every word, laughing and making additional comments. One of them, a private named Chris, pulled out his phone and began recording, thinking the whole thing was hilarious and worth sharing with friends back at base. "This is going to be epic," Chris whispered to his buddy. "Jake's really putting this entitled wife in her place." Sarah noticed the phone and felt a new wave of humiliation wash over her. Not only was she being harassed in public, but now it was being recorded for others to mock later. She thought about David and wondered what he would think if he saw this video. Would he be angry at the soldiers or disappointed in her for not standing up for herself more forcefully? "Please don't record this," she said quietly to Chris. "My children don't deserve to be part of whatever point you're trying to make." But Chris just laughed and kept filming. "Maybe your kids should see how their mommy handles herself in the real world. Might teach them something useful." Betty, the cashier, had finally had enough. She picked up the store phone and began dialing security, but the night security guard was elderly and moved slowly. She knew it would be several minutes before help arrived. Other customers were starting to gather, some filming with their own phones, others looking disgusted by the soldiers' behavior. An older man in a veteran's cap approached the group. "Son," he said to Jake, "I served in Vietnam, and this isn't how we treat our military families. You boys should be ashamed of yourselves." Jake turned his attention to the veteran, his chest puffed out with false bravado. "With all due respect, sir, times have changed. We can't just give everyone a free pass because they wear a military ID card. Some of us actually earn our stripes." The veteran shook his head sadly and walked away, muttering about how different things were in his day. Sarah felt even more alone, seeing that even other veterans couldn't or wouldn't help her situation. Meanwhile, the figure who had entered through the automatic doors was making his way through the store, unnoticed by the crowd gathered around the checkout area. He was tall, with broad shoulders and the unmistakable bearing of someone used to command. His dress blue uniform was impeccable, every ribbon and decoration precisely placed, but he moved quietly through the aisles, focused on his shopping list and unaware of the drama unfolding near the front of the store. Back at the checkout area, Jake was warming up for his grand finale. He had Sarah trapped, an audience watching, and the confidence that comes from believing you're completely in the right. "You know what really gets me," he said, his voice carrying across the store, "is how you people act like you're heroes just for marrying someone in uniform. Real heroes are out there fighting, not hiding behind desks and sending their wives out for sympathy shopping." Sarah's resolve finally began to crack. The combination of exhaustion, humiliation, and worry about her children was overwhelming. A single tear rolled down her cheek, which only seemed to encourage Jake further. "Oh, now the waterworks start," he said mockingly. "What's next? Are you going to tell me how hard your life is? How much you sacrifice? Lady, you have no idea what sacrifice looks like." Emma, sensing her mother's distress, began crying harder. Baby Michael joined in, his wails echoing through the store. Sarah bounced him gently while trying to comfort Emma with her free hand, all while Jake continued his cruel performance. "Even her kids know she's pathetic," one of the other soldiers commented, causing the group to burst into fresh laughter. That's when something inside Sarah snapped. She had endured the insults to herself, but attacking her children crossed a line she couldn't ignore. She handed Emma to Betty, who had come around from behind the counter to help and stepped directly in front of Jake Thompson. "You want to know about sacrifice?" she said, her voice stronger than it had been all evening. "You want to know about real heroes? My husband has been deployed 4 times in 8 years. He's missed birthdays, anniversaries, holidays, and the birth of his son because he was serving his country. He's lost friends, good men who died protecting people like you who think they know what honor means." Jake seemed surprised by her sudden show of backbone, but he wasn't ready to back down. "Yeah? And what does your hero husband do exactly? File paperwork? Train recruits? Sit in meetings?" "He saves lives," Sarah said simply. "He's a combat medic and he's earned 2 silver stars, a bronze star with V device, and a Purple Heart. But you know what? He never talks about it because real heroes don't need to brag about their service to feel important." The crowd that had gathered began to murmur among themselves. Some of the soldiers looked uncomfortable for the first time, realizing that perhaps they had misjudged the situation. But Jake was in too deep to back down now. "Silver stars, huh?" he said skeptically. "That's convenient. Easy to claim when the guy's not here to prove it. I bet if I asked for his name and unit, you wouldn't even know what to say." Sarah looked him straight in the eye. "Staff Sergeant David Martinez, 2nd Battalion, 75th Ranger Regiment. And if you knew anything about real military service, you'd know what that means." For the first time since the confrontation began, Jake Thompson looked uncertain. The 75th Ranger Regiment was legendary, known for producing some of the most elite soldiers in the Army. But he had gone too far to admit he might be wrong, especially in front of his friends and a growing crowd of onlookers. The mysterious figure in dress blues had finished his shopping and was heading toward the checkout area. Still unaware of the drama unfolding, his cart contained simple items: milk, bread, coffee, and a small toy that looked like it might be for a child. As he approached, he began to hear raised voices and see the crowd gathered near the registers. Something about the scene made him pause and listen more carefully to what was being said. Jake Thompson felt a flicker of doubt when Sarah mentioned the 75th Ranger Regiment, but his pride wouldn't let him back down. Instead, he doubled down on his cruel behavior, desperate to maintain his image in front of his friends and the growing crowd. "Oh, so now your husband's a ranger," he said with exaggerated disbelief. "Lady, do you even know what you're saying? Rangers are elite soldiers, not the kind of guys who marry women who need food stamps. If your husband was really a ranger, you'd be living a lot better than this." Sarah's face flushed with anger and embarrassment. The assumption that military families, even special forces families, always lived comfortably showed just how little Jake understood about military life and pay scales. Many military families, especially young ones with children, struggled financially despite their service members' elite status. "You don't know anything about military life," Sarah said, her voice shaking with emotion. "You don't know what it's like to wait months for a phone call, to wonder every day if your husband is coming home, to raise children alone while he's saving other people's lives." The figure in dress blues had moved closer now, his expression growing darker as he listened to the exchange. He could see Sarah's distress, her children's tears, and the cruel entertainment the young soldiers were getting from their harassment. Something about the woman seemed familiar, though he couldn't quite place why. Chris, still recording with his phone, zoomed in on Sarah's face. "This is gold," he whispered to his friend. "Wait until everyone back at base sees this entitled wife getting put in her place." "You want proof my husband is a ranger?" Sarah said, her voice growing stronger despite her tears. "Fine. His last deployment was to Afghanistan, where his unit was ambushed during a medical evacuation. He dragged 3 wounded soldiers to safety under enemy fire and performed field surgery that kept them alive until they could reach a hospital. 2 of those soldiers were rangers just like him. The third was a young Army corporal who reminded him of his little brother." Jake's smirk faltered slightly, but he pressed on. "Anyone can make up war stories, lady. If your husband was such a hero, where's your proof? Where are his medals? Why aren't you living like a hero's wife?" "Because real heroes don't parade their decorations around town," Sarah shot back. They lock them away in drawers because they remind them of friends who didn't make it home. Because every medal represents a day he wishes he could forget but never will. The older veteran who had tried to intervene earlier stepped forward again. "Son," he said to Jake, "I've heard enough. This woman is telling the truth. You can see it in her eyes in the way she talks about her husband. You boys are making a mistake you're going to regret." But Jake was beyond listening to reason. The crowd, the cameras, the attention, it all fed his ego and pushed him further into cruelty. "You know what I think?" he said loudly, addressing not just Sarah but the entire store. "I think this is all made up. I think her husband is probably some supply clerk or mechanic, and she's using fake stories to get sympathy. It's pathetic." The mystery figure in dress blues had heard enough. He abandoned his cart and began walking purposefully toward the commotion, his jaw set in a hard line. As he got closer, other shoppers began to notice him and step aside. There was something about his bearing, his presence, that commanded respect and attention. Sarah, meanwhile, was reaching her breaking point. The combination of public humiliation, her children's distress, and the constant attacks on her husband's honor was becoming unbearable. She thought about calling David, but he was thousands of miles away and couldn't help her even if he wanted to. "Please," she said one more time, her voice barely audible. "I just want to take my children home." "Haven't you done enough?" Jake looked around at his audience, seeing phones recording, people watching, and his fellow soldiers waiting for his next move. He felt like he was in too deep to stop now, like backing down would make him look weak in front of everyone. "You want to go home?" he said mockingly. "Then maybe you should have thought about that before you came in here acting like you deserve special treatment. Maybe you should have thought about that before you married some wannabe soldier who can't even provide for his family." That's when the man in dress blues reached the outer edge of the crowd. People began to notice him and conversation started to die down. There was something intimidating about his presence. Something that suggested he was not someone to be trifled with. He was older than the harassing soldiers, probably in his 40s with graying hair and eyes that had seen things most people couldn't imagine. His uniform was that of a Marine, and the ribbons on his chest told a story of multiple deployments, combat actions, and years of distinguished service. Sarah noticed the crowd's attention shifting and turned to see what they were looking at. When her eyes met those of the Marine, something passed between them. Recognition, understanding, and a shared knowledge of what true military service meant. The Marine didn't speak immediately. Instead, he stood quietly, taking in the scene, assessing the situation with the calm professionalism of someone used to making quick decisions under pressure. His eyes moved from Sarah and her children to the soldiers who had been tormenting her, and his expression grew even more serious. Jake, noticing the attention shifting away from him, turned to see what had captured the crowd's interest. When he saw the Marine, he felt a small flutter of nervousness but tried to maintain his bravado. Well, Jake said, trying to sound casual. "Looks like we've got some brass showing up." "Don't worry, sir. We're just having a friendly conversation with this lady about military life." The Marine's eyes fixed on Jake with an intensity that made the young soldier's confidence waver. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but carried the unmistakable authority of someone who had earned the right to be heard. "Is that what you call it, son?" the Marine said calmly. "A friendly conversation?" The store had grown eerily quiet, with even the background music seeming to fade away. Everyone seemed to sense that something significant was about to happen, that this was not going to be just another confrontation between strangers in a grocery store. Sarah looked at the Marine with gratitude and hope, recognizing in him the same quiet strength she saw in her husband. She didn't know who he was, but she could tell he was someone who understood honor, respect, and the true meaning of military service. The stage was set for a confrontation that would teach Jake Thompson and his friends a lesson they would never forget about assumptions, respect, and the consequences of cruelty. The Marine stood silently for several long seconds, his piercing gaze moving from Jake to each of the other soldiers in turn. The weight of his stare was almost physical, and the young men who had been so confident moments before now shifted uncomfortably under his scrutiny. "What's your name, soldier?" the Marine asked Jake, his voice calm but carrying an unmistakable edge of authority. Jake straightened instinctively, responding to the command presence even as he tried to maintain his defiant attitude. "Corporal Jake Thompson, sir. 2nd Airborne Division." And you think it's appropriate to harass a military spouse and her children in a public place, Corporal Thompson? Sir, we were just... She was acting entitled and we were trying to teach her some respect for real soldiers, Jake stammered, suddenly aware that his explanation sounded much worse when he had to say it to someone who clearly outranked him. The Marine's expression didn't change, but something dangerous flickered in his eyes. Real soldiers? He repeated quietly. Tell me, Corporal, what makes you a real soldier? Your 2 deployments sitting on a fob? Your ability to intimidate a woman with 2 small children? Jake's face reddened, both from embarrassment and anger. Sir, I've served my country honorably. I've been in combat situations and I know what it takes to be a soldier. This woman was claiming her husband is some kind of hero, but look at her. Using food stamps, can't even take care of her family properly. So you decided to judge her worth based on her financial situation? The Marine asked, stepping closer. You decided that struggling to make ends meet while her husband serves overseas makes her unworthy of basic human decency? Sarah watched the exchange with growing hope. Finally, someone was standing up for her, someone who understood what military families went through. Her children had stopped crying, sensing the shift in the room's energy. Sir, one of Jake's friends interrupted. We didn't mean any disrespect to the military. We just don't think people should get special treatment just because they're married to someone in uniform. The Marine turned his attention to the soldier who had spoken. What's your name? Private First Class Chris Mitchell, sir. Are you the one recording this confrontation, Private Mitchell? Chris looked down at his phone, suddenly ashamed. Yes, sir. Turn it off now. Chris immediately stopped recording and put his phone away. The authority in the Marine's voice left no room for argument or hesitation. The Marine turned back to Jake. You mentioned that this woman claimed her husband is a hero. What exactly did she tell you? Jake glanced around nervously, realizing that he was now the center of attention in a way he definitely didn't want. She said he was a ranger, said he had silver stars and all that. But look at her, sir. If her husband was really some elite soldier, would she be using government assistance? The Marine's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Do you know anything about military pay scales, Corporal? Do you understand that an E6 with a family of 4 might qualify for WIC benefits depending on their circumstances? Do you know that many military families struggle financially despite their service members' elite status or decorations? Jake's confidence was crumbling rapidly. No, sir. You thought wrong, the Marine cut him off. Now this woman mentioned her husband's name and unit. Staff Sergeant David Martinez, 2nd Battalion, 75th Ranger Regiment. Is that correct, ma'am? Sarah nodded, surprised that the Marine had been listening so carefully. Yes, sir. That's my husband. The Marine was quiet for a moment and something changed in his expression. It was subtle, but those watching closely could see recognition dawn in his eyes, followed by something that might have been awe or deep respect. Corporal Thompson, the Marine said slowly, do you know what the 75th Ranger Regiment is? Yes, sir. They're special forces, elite infantry. They're more than that, the Marine corrected. They're some of the finest soldiers this country has ever produced. They undergo some of the most rigorous training in the world, and they're deployed to the most dangerous missions. The fact that someone makes it through Ranger School and serves in the 75th Ranger Regiment means they've proven themselves in ways you can't even imagine. Jake was beginning to look sick. Yes, sir. Now, you mentioned that this woman's husband supposedly has silver stars. Do you know what it takes to earn a silver star, Corporal? Heroic action in combat, sir. Extraordinary heroism in connection with military operations against an armed enemy, the Marine recited. It's the 3rd highest military decoration for valor. Most soldiers serve entire careers without seeing anyone receive one, let alone 2. The crowd that had gathered was hanging on every word. Even Betty, the cashier, had stopped what she was doing to listen. The store had become completely silent except for the Marine's voice. But here's what's really interesting. The Marine continued, his voice taking on a different tone. I happen to know Staff Sergeant David Martinez personally. Sarah gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Jake looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. That's right, the Marine said, looking directly at Sarah with something approaching a smile. I was there when your husband earned his first Silver Star, Afghanistan, 18 months ago. Our units were working together on a joint operation when we came under heavy fire during a medical evacuation. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. But this time they were tears of validation and relief rather than humiliation. The Marine turned back to Jake, and his expression hardened again. Your husband, ma'am, didn't just drag 3 wounded soldiers to safety under enemy fire. He performed field surgery on them while bullets were flying over his head. One of those soldiers was me. The silence that followed was deafening. Jake's face had gone completely white, and his friends were staring at him in horror, realizing the magnitude of their mistake. That's right, Corporal Thompson, the Marine continued relentlessly. This woman's husband saved my life. While you were sitting here in the safety of American soil, mocking his wife and children, he was halfway around the world keeping soldiers like me alive. Jake opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. Chris looked like he wanted to be anywhere else in the world, and the other soldiers who had participated in the harassment were studying their shoes intently. The Marine wasn't finished. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small leather wallet, opening it to reveal a military ID. Colonel James Patterson, United States Marine Corps, and I'm here to tell you that Staff Sergeant Martinez is one of the finest soldiers I've ever had the privilege to serve alongside. Sarah felt a wave of emotion wash over her. After months of struggling alone, of dealing with people who didn't understand her sacrifice or her husband's service, here was someone who not only understood but had witnessed David's heroism firsthand. Colonel Patterson's revelation hung in the air like a thunderclap. The grocery store, which had been buzzing with cruel laughter and mockery just minutes before, was now silent except for the quiet hum of refrigeration units and the distant sound of shopping carts in other aisles. Jake Thompson felt like the world was crashing down around him. His face had gone from white to a sickly green color, and beads of sweat were forming on his forehead despite the store's air conditioning. The woman he had been tormenting wasn't just any military wife. She was married to a genuine American hero, a man who had saved the life of a Marine colonel. Sir, Jake began, his voice barely a whisper. I didn't know. No, you didn't know, Colonel Patterson said firmly. But that's not the point, is it? The point is that you saw a woman with children, a woman who was clearly struggling, and instead of offering help or even basic human decency, you chose to humiliate her for your own entertainment. Sarah stood holding her children, tears streaming down her face, but for the first time since the ordeal began, they were tears of relief and vindication. Someone who knew David, who had witnessed his courage firsthand, was standing up for him and for her. Colonel, Sarah said softly, How is David? Is he okay? The Marine's expression softened completely when he looked at her. He's doing well, ma'am. He's currently training new medics at Fort Benning. He talks about you and the children constantly. He carries pictures of you all in his medical kit. You know where he is? Sarah asked, her voice full of hope and longing. I do. In fact, I was planning to visit him this weekend. He's been working extra shifts to send money home to you and the children. He's been worried about how you're managing while he's been away training others. This revelation hit Jake like another blow. Not only had he been wrong about David Martinez being a hero, but the man was currently sacrificing time with his family to train other soldiers, ensuring they would be prepared to save lives on the battlefield. Colonel Patterson turned his attention back to the soldiers who had participated in the harassment. Now, gentlemen, let me explain something to you about military service and honor. What you've done here tonight is not just inappropriate. It's a disgrace to the uniform you wear. Chris, who had been recording the entire incident until ordered to stop, looked like he might be sick. Sir, we're sorry. We really didn't know. Being sorry isn't enough, the colonel interrupted. Do you understand that you've just spent the last 30 minutes attacking the family of a man who embodies everything you should aspire to as soldiers? A man who has repeatedly risked his life to save others, who has been recognized for extraordinary heroism, and who is currently dedicating his time to training the next generation of combat medics. The crowd that had gathered was now looking at Jake and his friends with undisguised disgust. What had started as entertainment at Sarah's expense had turned into a powerful lesson about assumptions. Respect and consequences, ma'am, Colonel Patterson said, addressing Sarah directly. I owe you an apology, not just for these soldiers' behavior, but for the fact that any military spouse should have to endure this kind of treatment. You deserve better from all of us. Thank you, Sarah managed to say through her tears. It means more than you know to hear from someone who knows David, who understands what he does. Betty, the cashier, had been watching the entire exchange with growing anger at the soldiers and admiration for the colonel. She stepped forward with a fresh box of tissues, offering them to Sarah with a gentle smile. Colonel Patterson wasn't finished with Jake and his friends. "Here's what's going to happen," he said, his voice taking on the tone of someone issuing orders. "First, you're going to apologize to this woman and her children. A real apology, not some half-hearted excuse." Jake nodded miserably. "Yes, sir." "Second, you're going to delete any recordings or photos you may have taken during this incident. All of them now." Chris and the other soldiers immediately pulled out their phones, deleting videos and photos under the colonel's watchful eye. "Third," the colonel continued, "you're going to reflect on what you've learned here tonight about making assumptions about your fellow service members and their families. Military service means supporting each other, not tearing each other down." "Yes, sir," all three soldiers said in unison. Jake stepped forward, his head hanging in shame. "Ma'am," he said to Sarah, "I am deeply sorry for everything I said tonight. You're right. I don't know anything about real sacrifice or what military families go through. I was wrong, and there's no excuse for how I treated you and your children." Sarah looked at him for a long moment. Despite everything he had put her through, she could see genuine remorse in his eyes. "I accept your apology," she said quietly. "I hope you'll remember this and treat other military families with the respect they deserve." Chris and the third soldier also apologized, their voices shaking with embarrassment and regret. The crowd began to disperse, many of them shaking their heads at the soldiers' behavior while others approached Sarah to offer their support and admiration for her grace under pressure. Colonel Patterson watched the apologies with satisfaction, but he wasn't quite finished. He reached into his wallet and pulled out a business card, handing it to Jake. "That's my contact information," he said. "I want you to research Staff Sergeant Martinez's service record, the parts that are public anyway. I want you to understand exactly who you were attacking tonight, and then I want you to write a letter to him, explaining what happened here and what you've learned from it." Jake took the card with trembling hands. "Yes, sir. I'll do that right away." "Good. And gentlemen, if I ever hear about any of you treating military families with anything less than the utmost respect, you'll answer to me personally. Is that clear?" "Crystal clear, sir," they responded together. As the soldiers began to leave, heads hanging in shame, Colonel Patterson turned back to Sarah. "Now, let me help you with your groceries and walk you to your car. And I have something for you from your husband. He asked me to give it to you if I ever ran into you." Sarah's eyes widened with surprise and anticipation. After the nightmare of the past hour, the thought of having something from David felt like a precious gift from heaven. Colonel Patterson reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, carefully wrapped package. "Your husband gave this to me 3 weeks ago when I visited the training facility. He said to give it to you if I ever had the chance, along with a message." Sarah's hands trembled as she accepted the package, her heart racing with excitement and emotion. Emma, still in her arms, looked curiously at the small gift while baby Michael had finally settled down in his cart. "What did he say?" Sarah asked softly, clutching the package to her chest. The colonel smiled, and for the first time since he had arrived, his stern expression softened completely. "He said to tell you that he thinks about you every single day, that you're the strongest person he knows, and that he's proud to be your husband. He also said that even though he can't be here to protect you from the world's cruelty, he hopes you'll remember how much you mean to him whenever things get difficult." Sarah's tears began flowing freely again, but these were tears of joy and love rather than humiliation and pain. "He always knows exactly what to say," she whispered. "There's more," the colonel continued. "He's been approved for a transfer back to the States permanently. He'll be home in 6 weeks." Sarah gasped, nearly dropping the package. 6 weeks, really? He's coming home for good?" "Yes, ma'am. He's earned the right to stay stateside and train new medics here. No more deployments, no more long separations. He'll be able to watch his children grow up and take care of his family the way he's always wanted to." Betty, who had been quietly organizing her checkout area while listening to the conversation, wiped away a tear of her own. Other customers who had witnessed the entire incident were smiling and nodding approvingly, many of them moved by the turn of events. Sarah carefully unwrapped the package with one hand while holding Emma. Inside was a small silver locket on a delicate chain. When she opened it, she found a tiny photo of David in his dress uniform on one side, and an even smaller photo of her and the children on the other. Engraved on the back were the words, "My heart is always with you, DM." He wanted you to have something to remind you that distance doesn't change how much he loves you, Colonel Patterson explained. He said you've been carrying the weight of the family alone for too long, and he wanted you to know that he sees your sacrifice and appreciates everything you do. Emma reached out to touch the shiny locket, her eyes wide with wonder. "Daddy?" she asked, recognizing the photo. "Yes, sweetheart," Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. "Daddy sent this for Mommy, and he's coming home very soon." Colonel Patterson helped Sarah clasp the necklace around her neck, then stepped back to help her load her groceries into the cart. As they walked toward the exit, other customers began to approach them. An elderly woman touched Sarah's arm gently. "Honey, I saw what those boys did to you, and I saw how you handled it with such grace. Your husband should be proud to have you as his wife." A middle-aged man who had been shopping with his teenage son stepped forward. "Ma'am, I'm a veteran myself, and I want you to know that not all soldiers behave like those young men. What your husband does, what you do as a military family, it matters to all of us." Even some of the store employees had come out to show their support. The manager approached with a gift card to the store and a heartfelt apology for what Sarah had endured on his property. As they reached the parking lot, Colonel Patterson helped Sarah load her groceries into her car, while Emma chattered excitedly about Daddy coming home. The contrast between this moment and the nightmare she had experienced just an hour earlier was almost surreal. "Colonel," Sarah said as she buckled her children into their car seats, "can I ask you something?" "Of course. How did you know to intervene? I mean, what made you get involved?" The Marine was quiet for a moment, looking up at the stars that were just becoming visible in the evening sky. "Your husband saved my life, Mrs. Martinez. He didn't just perform medical treatment on me. He stayed with me for hours, keeping me conscious, talking to me about his family, about his plans for the future. He told me about a woman who was brave enough to marry a soldier, strong enough to raise children alone while he was deployed, and loving enough to support his military career even though it meant sacrifice for her." He turned to look at her directly. "He told me that if anything ever happened to him, his biggest worry wasn't about dying. It was about leaving you to handle everything alone. He said you were already carrying too much weight, and he hated that his service added to your burden." Sarah felt a fresh wave of love for her husband wash over her. Even thousands of miles away, even while focusing on his dangerous job, David was thinking about her struggles and worrying about her well-being. "So when I heard those soldiers attacking you," the colonel continued, "I knew I was looking at the woman who had given my friend the strength to save my life. I knew I was looking at someone who deserved protection and respect, not cruelty and mockery. I couldn't let them continue." As Sarah drove home that night, the locket warm against her skin and her children peaceful in the back seat, she reflected on everything that had happened. She thought about Jake Thompson and his friends, and she genuinely hoped they had learned something valuable from their encounter with Colonel Patterson. She hoped they would become better soldiers and better men because of it. She thought about the kindness of strangers like Betty and the other customers who had shown her support. She realized that for every cruel person in the world, there were many more who were good and decent and willing to stand up for what was right. Most of all, she thought about David and the countdown that had just begun. 6 weeks until he would be home permanently. 6 weeks until their family would be whole again. 6 weeks until the long chapter of separations and deployments would finally end. The incident at the grocery store had started as one of the worst experiences of her life, but it had ended with validation, support, and the best news she could have imagined. Sometimes, she realized, the worst moments could lead to the most beautiful outcomes. As she pulled into her driveway, Sarah touched the locket again and smiled. Tomorrow, she would call David and tell him about Colonel Patterson, about the soldiers who learned a valuable lesson, and about how proud she was to be married to a man whose reputation for honor and heroism preceded him even into a grocery store confrontation. But tonight, she would simply hold her children close and count down the days until their hero came home for good.